On May 25, 2020, George Floyd, an African-American man, was killed by a white police officer. His death incited a racial reckoning. Black Lives Matter protests swept the country in the summer of 2020. Discussions on racism were being held and changes for racial equality were being made. One such change was the removal of more than 90 Confederate monuments. However, these actions were met with resistance from Republicans, Lost Cause supporters, white supremacists, and more. Former U.S. President Trump was one such opposer of the removal of Confederate symbols and, on the discussion of renaming Confederate Army bases, tweeted that, "These monumental and very powerful bases have become part of a great American heritage and a history of winning, victory, and freedom." Trump is not alone in the opinion presented in his tweet, but how much of his words are factually and historically true? My research throughout this quarter has led me to the conclusion that the Lost Cause's ties to white supremacy, religion, and Southern identity have successfully allowed the South to reimagine the Confederacy from an advocate for slavery to that of states' rights in the post-Civil War period and to the current time. This collective memory is the reason behind many white Americans, particularly Southerners' continued justification and support for the presence of Confederate symbols in public and government-owned spaces. What is the Lost Cause? Supporters of the U.S. Lost Cause reimagined the history of enslavement, the Civil War, and the Confederacy in the United States. They argued that the Civil War was not fought over slavery, which it was, but rather over states' rights, which, to clarify, was the state's right to enslave Black Americans. They carried on the image of the Confederacy after the Civil War through the dissemination of distorted history, laws on segregation, and the construction of public Confederate statues, flags, and monuments. When I interviewed Dr. Goodgerson, a history professor at SCU, for her opinion on the argument that Confederate symbols are part of our heritage and history and thus should not be removed, she answered that I disagree with such a claim. Most of the Confederate monuments were built not immediately following the war, but rather in the 1910s, a period of great xenophobia, and during the mid-20th century civil rights movement, apparently in an effort to retain white supremacist vision of the South and their Confederate heroes. In fact, according to Dr. Goodgerson, the state of Georgia added the Confederate flag to its state flag in 1956, 91 years after the end of the Civil War. Similarly, South Carolina began flying the Confederate flag over its state capital in 1961, 96 years after the end of the Civil War. The discrepancy in the timeline of events revealed that these symbols did not pay homage to the Civil War, but rather served as a constant reminder to Black Americans of the white supremacy ideology that continued to pervade much of America decades and centuries after the Civil War. In my interview with Dr. Anthony Q. Hazard Jr., an associate professor of ethnic studies and history at SCU, he points out that in reality, such symbols represent treason against the United States of America, which is a very specific heritage that only applies to those who fought for and supported the Confederacy. In addition to their ties to white supremacy, many white Southerners who supported the Lost Cause also believed that they were the true Christians. As a result, many Confederate monuments included inscriptions with numerous biblical references and diction. This allowed the Lost Cause to become a part of the supporters' religious identity and added a further justification for their movement. In general, after the Civil War, many Southerners sought to cultivate this image of the Lost Cause as one of honor, a Southern genteel way of life, and as a figure of resistance to what they perceived to be Northern oppression. The Lost Cause and the symbols that represented it became a source of identity to many Southerners. Thus, to Neo-Confederates, their support for Confederate statues, flags, monuments, and memorials is rooted in their identity, which is much harder to disprove or refute than logical, fact-based evidence. So, the question is, what now? What can we do to address the backlash against the removal of Confederate symbols from public space, and in the larger context, erase racism from our country? When I asked both Dr. Goodgerson and Dr. Hazard about their opinions on the future of such Confederate symbols, their answer is that they belong in museums, where they can be viewed by choice in a space that provides proper historical context.
Currently, according to an updated edition of the 2016 report, Whose Heritage, the SPLC identified 114 Confederate symbols that were removed after the Charleston attack, and 1,747 that still stood. Even after taking into account the monuments taken down during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, over 1,000 symbols that promote slavery and racism remain standing. Moreover, as recent as in this month, March of 2021, some states are considering policies that would legally protect Confederate statues. This requires a call to action on all of our parts. We need to push for our policymakers to hold honest discussions regarding the devastating legacy of slavery and racism in the United States, and hold our leaders accountable for honest, affecting, and lasting change, including passing policies that take down Confederate symbols. I believe this discussion has already been started by the Black Lives Matter movement last summer, but it definitely has not ended. We can support the Black Lives Matter movement directly, or through organizations like the aforementioned Southern Poverty Law Center, or SPLC, an American nonprofit for legal advocacy that specializes in civil rights and racial justice. However, this is not enough. These discussions and policies will never truly work if a significant portion of our nation remains ignorant on the legacy of slavery in America. We need to start with reshaping our education standards and requirements, especially in regions in the South, where old, outdated textbooks have either inadequately taught about enslavement in America or have written about the Confederacy in a distorted, positive light. The SPLC offers a possible solution: their Learning for Justice program, which offers free resources that, among other things, teach racial justice to educators working with K-12 students. If this program can be officially added as a supplement to our public school curriculum, or used as a template for them to make their own, this can greatly aid in reducing prejudice and racism due to ignorance or misinformation in our next generation.